All right. Hey, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Science North Bluecoat Talks. My name is Megan Mitchell, and today is a really special day because it's International Science Center and Science Museum Day, November 10th. It's a really fun day for us. Plus, I have the pleasure of introducing to you Kat Lucas, who is the Aqualinks Program Assistant at the Toronto Zoo. And so, hi, Kat, welcome.
Hello.
Thank you so much for being here with us today. And I just want to shout out to those of you watching at home that you can, or at work on your lunch break or wherever you're watching from, that you can ask a question. And then I'll make sure to kind of work it into our conversation so you can leave it in the chat box. So Kat, this is really exciting for me personally, mostly because when I started my career here at Science North, I worked in the Lakes and Rivers lab. So water has been a really big part of like my career here at Science North and the science that I teach. So I guess the first thing that we need to know is like, what is your job? What do you do with as Aqualinks Program Assistant?
All right, thanks, Megan. So at the Toronto Zoo, I work as the Aqualinks Program Assistant, and I've been in this role for almost 2 years now. And a lot of my job is doing outreach. So I'm connecting with students and adults, mostly in the Greater Toronto area, but these days we have the luxury of being able to do things virtually and reaching very different audiences than we used to. And for the most part, we're talking about the Great Lakes and the different species at risk that live here. And we talk about fish as well as freshwater mussels, and just help people get an understanding of what sort of things are out there in the Great Lakes and how we can all take care of them. One of the other projects that I work on is our Aqualinks program, which is where we raise Atlantic salmon in hatcheries in classrooms. So we actually bring in the eggs in January, and the students get to take care of them and watch them hatch and grow until usually around May or June. And then we actually go into our local rivers and waterways and release them out into nature. So that's one of the big programs I work on, as well as another program called Blue Schools, which is all about water conservation and learning about our water usage and how we can make some differences.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah.
That probably keeps you really busy.
Yes.
That's awesome. Okay, so there's a lot to touch on there. And the first thing you mentioned was talking about species at risk. So for those that are watching that maybe don't know what that term means, do you want to just give a quick kind of definition of what a species at risk is?
Mm-hmm. So a species at risk, it's just a way of categorizing a living thing based on how close it might be to extinction. So we know extinct means gone forever, like our dinosaurs. At least with current science, we can't be bringing them back, but who knows what the future holds. But then we have extirpated, which is the next one down, and that means locally extinct. So it means it used to live in this area, but it doesn't live here anymore, but others still might live somewhere else. So a really good example is our Atlantic salmon. And I've got a model right here I can pull out.
Awesome.
So here we go. This is a full-sized Atlantic salmon. And they are native to Lake Ontario. There was a population here that lived here for thousands of years until our first settlers came about 200 years ago and ended up overfishing them and just doing a lot of development, and it didn't do very well for their habitat. So they used to live here in the Great Lakes, so right in Lake Ontario. But these days we can really only find them in the Atlantic Ocean between like Newfoundland and Norway, still lots, but locally extinct here in the Great Lakes.
Okay.
Then we've got endangered, which most people know about. It means, if we're not careful, there might be less and less of them. So just species at risk is just the broader category for any sort of living thing that might need a little bit more concern from us humans and how we act.
Okay. Wow. Okay. So when you're talking about then, when you're doing your outreach about species at risk, our Atlantic salmon is one of the ones that you're most commonly talking about, or are there other species?
We've got quite a few. So in the Great Lakes, there's over 150 different kinds of fish, and we've got a good handful of them that are at risk.
150?
Yeah. And we've got everything from small little minnows to the largest freshwater fish in the world, which is the lake sturgeon, lives in our Great Lakes, can be about 3 meters long and about 300 pounds, and they can live over 100 years. And it's so neat that the world's largest fish, freshwater fish at least, lives right here in our Great Lakes.
Wow, that's really cool. I feel like that was like in the back of my mind at some point, but that's really amazing. So generally, do the Great Lakes sort of share the same species, or are some Great Lakes a little bit different than others?
For the most part, they're quite similar, though, of course, Lake Superior is our biggest and deepest. So it definitely holds some different species that you might not find in some of the smaller, shallower lakes. And things like the lake sturgeon that do like deeper cold water do like to live up in Lake Superior.
Okay, so we just got a question here, which is a really good question and definitely on the thread that we were heading. So what are the major threats to the Great Lakes environments? I guess it's a really broad question, but if you want to speak to some of the individual threats to like some of the species you mentioned as well, like the lake sturgeon.
Mm-hmm. So, of course, human activity is one of those big threats, and there's so many different aspects of that human activity that can have impacts on the Great Lakes environment. Those are things like overfishing, right? And people taking more than they need. So we want to make sure that if we are fishing, we're taking as much as we need and just being careful about what sort of regulations exist to protect our fish. We have things like habitat destruction. Our cities just keep getting bigger and bigger, right? Everyone wants to live in the big city. And now we're seeing that this urban sprawl and these cities getting bigger and bigger are just taking up more of our natural areas, which leaves less space for these kinds of animals. Another big thing is invasive species, which many people may be familiar with. These are different sort of living things that have come from somewhere else in the world, and now they're living here and they're causing problems. I actually have a model of some zebra mussels here. So you can see they're fairly small, and these guys have been dead for a while, so you can't quite see the nice zebra stripes that they're known for. But these came here probably in the 60s and 70s, 1960s and 1970s, and they came over on a boat from Russia. And the boat was carrying lots of cargo, and so in order to balance the boat, they fill it with water in the ballast tank. And so the cargo comes over here. Once they get here, they offload the cargo, and then they dump the ballast tank. So whatever was in that water in Russia is now being emptied in here so that this boat can have a super quick trip back to Russia now that it's much lighter. And lo and behold, these zebra mussels were actually in the ballast tank, and we didn't know that. And now they have spread right through the Great Lakes. So they are a really big problem because they're not nice for humans because they have really sharp shells. So if you step on them, they might cut open your foot. Really important to wear your stylish water shoes that no one actually wants to wear. But they're also not very good for our native mussel species. So we have 41 species of freshwater mussels in Ontario. And these mussels here are actually really good at cleaning the water for us. So I've got two right here so you can get an idea of what they look like. These are real. And they they do just as good of a job at cleaning the water as our invasive zebra mussels. And they can clean things out of the water like bacteria and algae. And they will spit out the water even cleaner, which is great for us and keeping our ecosystems clean. But unfortunately, with these zebra mussels, they're taking over the habitat and they're eating so much food that our poor native mussels don't have too much left.
Okay. I think zebra mussels are probably one of the more common invasive species that we hear about. Are there any other invasive species that you look at in your program?
Yep, so we talk about sea lamprey as well, and from their name, you know they're from the ocean.
I actually really love sea lamprey. I think they're super cool.
But a lot of people don't like them. They're from the ocean, but they made their way into the freshwater, and they said, sure, it's okay, whatever. And they will actually They have a mouth that's about the size of a loony, and it's full of really sharp teeth and an even sharp tongue. And what they'll do is they will latch onto the sides of fish, and they'll suck their blood, kind of like a vampire or a leech. And sometimes they will suck the blood until the fish dies, or sometimes they'll hop off a little early, but then the fish has a big open wound that can get infected.
Yeah.
And so that's not very nice for the fish. Number one question I usually get is like, what happens if it gets me?
Yeah.
And I have to let you know that they do really like cold-blooded animals. So luckily, as humans, we've got that warm blood. We're not their top choice. So it's good to know. But if you are planning a long-distance swim, maybe across Lake Ontario, that's about 40 hours you'd be swimming in the water for, your body temperature drops enough to confuse them. So there's stories of these long-distance swimmers who have to pull the lamprey that are sucking on them off. Luckily, they don't actually dig in their teeth, but they do get nice and suctioned on. And back in February, I had the lovely opportunity of having a lamprey suck on my palm, which, once in a lifetime experience. But they had them out for some outreach. And as they were putting them away, they said, would you like to try? And why not? You only live once.
Exactly.
They stuck the lamprey on me, and it just suction cupped. It didn't obviously leave any lasting damage. It didn't bite into me, but it hung in there for a few seconds and then fell off. So okay. I'm okay to believe that they're not coming for me if I'm out in the Great Lakes.
We have a question from Emma, and she's asking, how did the sea lamprey get into the Great Lakes?
Mm-hmm. So they did come in here more or less on their own, but they were definitely helped by the building of some canals that made it a little bit easier for them to get from from the Atlantic Ocean into the Great Lakes.
Okay. So the Great Lakes ecosystem, I know, is a really big part. It's a really huge environment, huge ecosystem. It's also really important in terms of the amount of fresh water that's available. So do you have like a favorite Great Lakes fact that you love to tell people?
I do. So I've got another model I'll pull out.
Okay.
This guy here is an American eel. Whoops, where's his face? There you go. And this guy is about full size again. Couple of feet here, and they live here in the Great Lakes. They actually do a very big migration. So they will only breed and lay their eggs in one spot in the entire world, which is in the Sargasso Sea off the coast of Florida. So down in the Atlantic Ocean. And they, when they're babies, they will swim all the way north into our freshwater lakes and rivers along the coast in both the United States and Canada. And they will come inland as far as about Algonquin Park. So they'll come just about that far into Ontario. And something really neat about eels is that they are able to breathe in water like a fish, obviously, but they can also breathe on land. And what they will do is they can produce a lot of mucus, like slime and boogers, all over their body, and they're able to actually breathe through their skin when it's kept moist like this. And they might survive, they might stay out of the water for maybe about 15 minutes if it's a bright, sunny day. But there's stories about them lasting for closer to 12 hours if it's a nice rainy night. So pretty neat that these guys here are able to do a little bit of both.
Wow. And is the American eel also a species at risk?
They are. In Ontario, they're listed as at risk, and a big part of that has to do with barriers to their migration. So we see things like hydroelectric dams that are now in their way through these rivers, and so they can't get to where they need to go to either eat or to lay their eggs. Luckily, they've got this adaptation where they can kind of wiggle around a small dam, but some of the bigger dams can be a problem. But luckily, we do know now as humans that this might cause a problem. So there have been new features added to a lot of dams to help fish get by. So whether that's something like a fishway, which is like a water slide that runs beside the dam. Some of them have a fish ladder so they can actually hop all the way up and over. And for things like salmon, you may have heard of a salmon cannon. And basically, it's a huge tube, and the salmon can go into the tube, and it shoots them up and over. So lots of some neat things going on to help these migratory fish get where they need to go.
That's amazing. Mm-hmm. So I'm assuming a lot of research went into developing stuff like that. Does your program do any research?
So we don't do research with the dams or aspects like that. We do support a bigger global organization called World Fish Migration Day, which does support a lot of research on our migratory species. In Canada, that's our Atlantic salmon and American eels. But for firsthand research that we do at the zoo, we do a lot on our freshwater mussels. So we were part of a joint partnership to do a mussel study that ran about 5 years in the Greater Toronto area a few years ago. And it was pretty much the first study of its kind. No one had bothered to think, what sort of mussels live out here and what does that look like in an urban environment? So we worked with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, and we did a survey to see what sort of mussels exist, mostly just through the Greater Toronto area. And so some new research, and we're hoping to continue this sort of research as well.
That's awesome. Mm-hmm. So how would you, like, if I was in one of the many lakes and rivers in the area, how would I differentiate the invasive zebra mussel from our native species of mussel?
Mm-hmm. So with these zebra mussels, for the most part, they are going to be much smaller. So you can see this is probably more or less as big as they get, compared to this guy here who is called a purple warty back. He's got purple on the inside, warts on the outside. So size is usually a good indicator for our mussels. But also we have an app, a citizen science app called Clam Counter, and you can download it for your iPhone or your Android, and it actually takes you through how to identify a mussel that you might find. So here in the Great Lakes, we've got about 41 species of freshwater mussels. So this app, you can take a picture as well as just kind of follow the questionnaire and see where it leads you. And you can get a good idea of what you're looking at.
That's really cool. That's one of like the things we love the most at Science North is like citizen science. So I'm going to look into that one.
Yeah. And all the data that's collected about these mussel, like the mussel identification, is shared with the Toronto Zoo and Department of Fisheries and Oceans. And so we're able to have real scientists look at this data and get an idea of where these mussels are, because they are definitely under research. People don't want to bother with something that just looks like a rock, right? No one thinks twice about something like this. But like I said, they're super important for our ecosystem, because they can keep that water clean for us, as well as for other wildlife too.
Absolutely. Undervalued, those mussels. We have another question by Emma, and she's asking, or they're asking, are there any, I think there's a word missing. I'm so sorry. Are there any significantly different species in Lake Ontario versus Lake Superior?
So like I said, not too big of differences. You are going to see some larger fish in Lake Superior for sure, just because it's such a larger body of water.
Okay. So do generally then all of the Great Lakes share the same biodiversity?
Yeah, for the most part, though, of course, I guess another benefit of Lake Superior is that there's less people living around there. So it's generally a cleaner ecosystem. So definitely it's on the safer side of things right now compared to some of our lakes that might be closer to urban or agricultural settings. So there is going to be some diversity, biodiversity changes there, but
that's awesome.
We got 150 species, so they're all spread out.
Yeah, that's amazing. I had never really stopped to consider like how many species, and that was just fish, right? That wasn't even fish. All of the other invertebrates that live in that ecosystem, or vertebrates even. That's amazing.
I think there's over 3,500 living things that call the Great Lakes region their home.
Including humans or excluding?
I think might be one of those 3,500. And the Great Lakes, they do provide drinking water to about 25% of Canadians. So you can just imagine like how like densely populated this region is with humans, which again can pose threats. But there's also opportunities there too. We have so many people who know this is our drinking water, know this is home to all of these different animals, and really become stewards to help protect the area.
Right. So I guess the next question is, so we're in Sudbury right now, right? Science North is in Sudbury, Ontario. You're in Toronto at the Toronto Zoo. So is there anything that we can do that will help the Great Lakes, just like at home, do your part kind of thing?
Of course. So one easy thing that we can all do that would make a difference is to conserve water. So when we're brushing our teeth, I know we've been learning this since kindergarten, right? Turn off the tap while you're brushing and save that water. Now that we're washing our hands more than ever, again, we can turn off the tap, save that 20 seconds while we're lathering, and then go back and turn it on when we're ready. We can also try to avoid pollution and littering, right? We don't want to be a litter bug. Don't be the kind of person who throws garbage anywhere, right? And if it's safe, we want to actively try and get that pollution out of nature as well. So if you feel comfortable and you see a piece of garbage that can easily be moved and put in the right spot, then do it if it's safe. And we also want to be careful about what goes down the drain. So there's many things that are going down the drain that maybe shouldn't be these days. You might want to read the labels on the kind of cleaning products you use and try to choose ones that are more eco-friendly. We see sometimes like things like gasoline or road salts are going down the drain, and both of those can have big impacts on our wildlife and in our aquatic regions. We're also seeing things like microplastics now. There's a lot of new research around these, which are just tiny, tiny pieces of plastic. So that can be things like glitter, right? When we use glitter like in a bath bomb or for a craft and we wash our hands, those little pieces of glitter can go down the drain and are sometimes now entering our natural bodies of water. Sometimes there's little tiny beads in your exfoliating hand soap. These days that is banned for more manufacturing in Canada as of July 2017, I believe. Those are no longer available, but still sometimes you'll find them on the shelf, so you just have to be careful.
Right.
And there's very new research too about microfibers, which are the little threads that come off your clothes every time you wash your clothes. So we're finding now that when you wash your clothes, and these days, so many of us have clothes that aren't made with natural fibers, especially workout gear, right? We have things like polyester, which is just code for plastic, but it's nice because it doesn't smell bad, and it dries very quickly, which we like when we're working out. But unfortunately, every time we wash our clothes, tiny little fibers of these plastics can come off and go down our drain and into the Great Lakes. So things like that, we can be a little bit more careful about what we're buying, and maybe even stop buying more clothes. I'm sure I have more clothes than I could possibly need. So we can try and work towards like that minimalism and conscious closet, right? And those are little steps we can take. And it's great with students too, who might not be of voting age, but there's things that they can do for sure that can put their money where their mouth is and vote with their dollar.
Right. Those are all really good suggestions. And it's like you said, we've been hearing about some of these things since we were in kindergarten, and yet we're still learning at the same time, right? With microplastics and understanding those impacts. We actually have a filter on our washing machine here at Science North that catches some of those microfibers because we have to wash our laundry for our animals here, so, and humans too. So yeah, there's a lot.
And sometimes those filters aren't always affordable for a house or a home, right? So there are other options and alternatives as well. There's something called the Guppy bag, Guppy, and it's just a big laundry bag, and you put your workout clothes in there, and you throw that in the wash, and that actually captures the little fibers that might come off. And every so often, if you see the fibers, you pull them out, make sure they go in the garbage, and just do that little part as well.
That's cool. I've never heard of the Guppy bag.
Yeah, it's definitely a more affordable option, right?
Yeah.
Not everyone can fully retrofit their washing machine, and it's a lot of money.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so the other project I know you mentioned when we first started chatting was about Aqua Links, and there's like an international component with that as well, right? Did you want to talk about that a little bit? That's really neat.
Yep. So our Aqualinks program started as a collaboration between the Canadian Laurentian Great Lakes, which is their formal global title, as well as with the Great Lakes that are out of Africa. So we were able to connect with students and classrooms over in Africa around the Great Lakes there, and just connect the students here with their project, learning about Atlantic salmon, with some of the projects and the programs going on over in Africa. So it was really neat to bring these students together and hear about the similar threats that might exist between these two continents, as well as the very different threats that might exist between the two continents, and see how we all can work together to be protecting wildlife around the world. But a new link that we've just started to build is with Streamscape Ireland, which runs a very similar hatchery program with students in Ireland, where they're actually, again, raising and releasing Atlantic salmon in their classrooms. And it's just so neat to have these two very similar programs on different sides of the ocean, where we're all working towards the same goal of bringing these Atlantic salmon populations back up.
That's awesome. Okay, so that's a couple times now that you've mentioned the hatchery system in a classroom. So like, how does that work? Like, what is encompassed in raising?
It's a lot of equipment. So it's like it's an aquarium, right? They're kind of like any sort of like classroom pet that you might have. We bring in a big aquarium, and then the fish, they come in as eggs. So they are usually brought in from our partners with the provincial government, and they help provide these fish to us, as well as with our partners from the Ontario Fish Federation of Anglers and Hunters. They run the bigger, broader program, and we offer just a little piece of their umbrella through the Toronto Zoo. So together, we're releasing like hundreds of thousands of baby salmon with the three partners every year. So we've got lots and lots going on. And basically the students get them, they're just eggs. So like I got a little model of some fake salmon eggs here.
Is that how big they are?
That's about how big they are.
Cool.
So it's about the size of a pea, and usually kind of a reddish orange. And if you've ever seen Orbeez, we've got, they look a lot like those little orange Orbeez that many students are enjoying playing with these days. So they just start off like that, and then they grow maybe about an inch in the 6 months that they've got them. And once they're at that inch, we call them a fry. And at that point, we go release the fry into different waterways around Toronto. So either the Credit River or Duffins Creek, which are both on either end of Toronto, just a little bit outside of the city, but lots of really good habitat, and they're in conservation areas. So we know that the land and the animals there will be protected.
Okay. So you don't just like dump them into the big lake. They have to go in.
No, so the part of their life cycle is to start in those little in the little rivers,
Okay.
and then they'll spend the first few years just living in the river, and then they'll head down to Lake Ontario. So a really neat thing about the population of Atlantic salmon in the Great Lakes is that they're landlocked. So often we hear of salmon going from freshwater to saltwater and then back. But these guys here, they just use Lake Ontario as their ocean. So usually they go out to the ocean because it's like an all-you-can-eat buffet. So they go and they grow really big, spend a few years in the ocean, and then come back. But this way, because they're not going as far as the ocean, they have much more energy, and they can actually breed and lay eggs many years. Whereas something like a Pacific salmon, where they have that big, long journey, they use all of their energy just to get where they need to go to breed, they end up dying as soon as they lay those eggs. So it's really neat that these Atlantic salmon can keep reproducing after that.
Wow. Okay, that's really cool. And do the students get to actually go and release them, like your little babies kind of going off into the world?
Yeah, so we scoop them all into a bag and then take the bag out to the river, and the students get a net, and one by one they release. Usually we give them 100 eggs, and the goal is to have all 100 released at the end of the day, and usually our rates are that good.
That's awesome. So we have a question here from Renata, and she is asking, how important is it to hatch those Atlantic salmon artificially? And then the second part is, are you able to track them to make sure that they're surviving till adulthood?
So it is really important to help supplement the population like this, just because they are locally extinct. So there just weren't enough adults left in the Great Lakes to keep sustaining a population. So we are here helping them, giving them new life, and so far, it has been pretty good. We're starting to just get to the end of, or the beginning, I guess, of where we can start to see the progress of the program. been running for about 10 years through the Toronto Zoo, and I think just a little bit longer with the larger program. And basically, we are now starting to see adults returning to these rivers. Not too many just yet, but it's a really good sign that, they're reaching that 10 years, they're mature, they're ready. So hopefully in the next couple of years, those numbers will just keep climbing, and we will have these adults breeding on their own. And the long-term goal is for that self-sustaining population where us humans do not have to impact or bring anything into this world. They'll just keep breeding on their own, and they'll be happy and healthy without us.
That's awesome.
The second part of the question is, do we track them? And at the zoo, we don't. The time when we release them, they're just so small, you couldn't possibly put a little tracker on them. But the provincial government does do a lot of the tracking. So they're out there doing the counts and seeing what's happening.
Okay. So at what point then, like if it's taken 10 years to see just a few adults, like at what point can you say, great, they're not extirpated anymore? We don't.
I don't know if there's a time goal on that one, but because it will require some long-term monitoring as well. And again, there's so much going on in the world, many different threats, including things like climate change. So it is hard to know what looks good in their ecosystem and whether we for sure know that they can continue without us. So it's probably still at least another 5 years down the line before being able to start really asking that question.
Okay, yeah. It's such a big question, and the ecosystem has so many variables, right? So that would be an impossible thing. Yeah. Be like, once we have 23. No, I'm just kidding. That's awesome. So my question, I guess, is more of like a personal one, but like I'm curious, like how you like got interested in working in a job like this. Like what was your passion?
Mm-hmm. I think maybe back in university, I didn't really want to work with fish. I think like most people, I wanted to study like the cute little mammals. They're those charismatic megafauna, as they're sometimes called, right? The big ones that are cute. But I started to learn more about water, and then the water became the important part rather than the fish. And then that kind of blended right back into being about fish. But I knew that I was passionate about talking to others about the environment and helping build those connections and building motivating others to be stewards. So I think that's pretty important to me, just being able to have a job where I can connect with others and let them know that we have something really special here in the Great Lakes. They're the largest freshwater system in the world, and often we overlook them, right? We don't even realize how lucky we are to live where we do and have this access to all this fresh water. So it is something that I'm passionate about, connecting with others and letting them get on board as well. So here at the zoo, our mission is to connect people, animals, and conservation science to fight extinction. So that really fits in well with my own personal mission and just connecting others to really care about the environment, especially our youth, right? We know that they're going to help us. We can't do it without them. And it's so important to get our students involved and really caring about the world around them.
That's awesome. So what did you like in terms of career path? Like what did you have to take in school in order to get a job like yours?
So in high school, I knew I did want to work with science. So I ended up taking, all the biologies, chemistry, math, all the stuff that no one really wants to take, the hard ones. And then in university, I went to the University of Guelph, where I studied zoology, so the study of all animals. And again, my focus was really split between the cute little mammals and fish. So I did study fish and water there, but wasn't sure if I was ready for that just yet. And then I did do a summer job working in a fish lab where I spent time like doing animal husbandry. So actually like breeding these fish, trying to see whether we could do different kinds of breeding, whether it's like in vitro where you're helping them breed outside of their bodies and things like that with zebrafish. And that was for medical research there. And then I ended up going back to school and doing my master's in environmental science. And then at that point, I really knew where I wanted to focus, and that was on aquatic toxicology. So looking at how things in the water are maybe not doing very nice things to our fish. So I was looking specifically at how medicine like Tylenol might affect how fish are able to reproduce and to breed. So that was pretty interesting to look at it from that side, because something we don't think about is everything that we consume and then pee out can go all the way down the drain into our Great Lakes, even something like Tylenol. Luckily, my research found that it's not going to affect them, at least at the very high concentrations that I studied. So that is good news.
Yeah, that's not something I think many of us stop to think about in terms of like, yeah, just our daily consumption of things and the way our bodies process it, and then it's got to go somewhere, right? Yeah. That's so interesting.
And like, there's research out there even about things like caffeine. Every cup of coffee, right? We don't use all of that caffeine. Some of it we pee out, and they're finding that sometimes the fish are like getting all jittery too. So everything's connected.
Oh, goodness. So I wanted to remind everyone watching that we'll continue taking some questions, so don't be shy, ask away. We'll be continuing on for a few more minutes, so you have some time to get in those last minute questions for Kat if you have any burning Atlantic salmon questions or anything about water conservation. So there is actually a question, I just noticed in the chat box. So what was the reason for the local extinction of the Atlantic salmon?
Mm-hmm. So Atlantic salmon were sustainably harvested for many years by our indigenous peoples. And as soon as our first settlers came in about 200 years ago, that really kind of changed everything. And these first settlers, they saw all of these fish and they said, wow, look at all of them. And they very quickly overfished the salmon down to next to nothing. And that was in addition to all of their development and industrialization and just bringing in all of these new buildings and everything else into these areas that were very close to waterways, because back in the day, it was so important to be on a waterway for easy transportation. So that's why many of our cities are really, really close to water, because back in the day, it made sense to be on a waterway, easy transportation. These days we have roads, so it's not as big of a deal, but because they were building so close to these bodies of water, everything that they did, all that construction ended up altering those habitats as well.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm glad to hear that there's programs out there that are introducing them back into the wild. That's really awesome. So if I was a visitor at the Toronto Zoo, because the Toronto Zoo is open right now,
Yes.
right? So you can visit the Toronto Zoo, everyone. So if I was a visitor at the Toronto Zoo, would I be able to see any of the things that you're doing?
So we do have an exhibit in our Americas Pavilion where we do have some information about American eels as well as Atlantic salmon. So you can check that out next time you're there. We do have some fish, local species in with our beavers, which is kind of a nice multi-species habitat where you can see a little bit of a whole bunch of different fish as well as our beavers in there. So that's pretty neat. And also, like, there's lots of information we have online too if you'd like to learn more. Our website has lots of information about these species at risk. And we also offer presentations virtually this year where you can learn all about a species at risk that is local to your school or your home. And more information about that can be found on our website, as well as if you email greatlakes@torontozoo.ca. And we're happy to share lots of information with your students or anyone else who might be interested.
That's cool. So is your program more so towards like school, or can anyone say, hey, I want to learn more?
Right now, the focus is sort of on schools and then youth and adult groups. So if you have a youth group or a group of adults who has an interest in learning more, we'd be happy to connect with you as well.
Okay, that's really cool. And as a reminder for everyone watching that live in Sudbury, right? Our city has like over 300 lakes in it, and we are part of the same watershed as the Great Lakes. So all of our water here in Sudbury flows down into the Great Lakes and then eventually out into the Atlantic Ocean. So as a reminder, right, I know we chatted about this a little bit before, it's just all the water's connected in some shape or form, right? So, okay, so is there, like, if there's one thing that you want everyone to sort of remember from today's conversation, what would it be?
I think it's just that there's so many little things that we can do that would make a big difference. So it's important just to be thinking about everything that we do in our day, all those activities and those behaviors, as well as those products and things that we use or eat, and how that might have an impact. So just taking some time to reflect and maybe making some goals and some choices that might really make a big difference.
Okay, that's a great message. Okay, so we're going to wrap it up. This was so much fun. Thank you so much, Kat,
Thanks, Megan,
for being here with us today. And I just wanted to kind of end off the conversation with saying that, you know, being that it's International Science Center and Science Museum Day today, it's sort of really amazing to stop and like reconnect with like the science museums and science centers that are around us. And zoos, of course, are comprised within that. Like they're basically like a museum full of live things that you learn about science. So to take a moment to sort of like appreciate that, and then noting that they're important because it creates those the dialogue, right? The dialogue between us and scientists and you know, healthcare professionals, and bridging that gap so we can make better decisions about things that we're doing in our everyday lives, right? So Toronto Zoo, your mission is to connect people with conservation. We have a similar mission here at Science North to connect people with science in their everyday lives. So it's really amazing to have had this opportunity to chat with you, Kat. Thank you so much for being here. And I hope everyone is going to have the rest of a really fantastic day today. Stay safe. And of course, join us for our other things that we're doing online here at Science North, and the Toronto Zoo has a lot to offer as well. So I hope everyone has a great day. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.